Whew, well, here we go. We're gonna make it work. I don't know how this happened. If you're tuning in, let me know if you can hear my voice. Let me know if you can if I'm still visible on the third to fourth density earth plane. Right before we were about to start today's live, we accidentally glitched into the back rooms. The good news is I brought my phone so we can still go live. So, congratulations, everyone. We're live from the back rooms. It's still 2025. Luckily, somebody out there can see us, they can hear us. So, welcome to a pocket dimension of our own creation. Yes, it's true. We created it with our co-creative abilities. As they say, we live in a society, right? And yeah, this is one of the realms that we've co-created. So anyway, welcome to the back rooms, everyone. Um, there we go. I'm here in a fever dream. Somebody's in a fever dream. It's White Swan. Perfect, perfect. This entire live stream today is a fever dream because we are trapped in the back rooms. So technically, uh, well, I mean, if you want to get technical, none of us are actually here. Makes it a little bit weird, right? Makes a little bit weird. Felicia says phones work off planet too. You can call home. So ET could have phoned home the whole time then. Damn it. You know what I mean? There goes that whole script. But yeah, I'll bet you they do. Anyway, I'm here in a pocket dimension and we're gonna and if you found this broadcast, welcome back. Where's my car? I know, right? And if you found this broadcast, welcome back. This is episode 4 of what will probably be a very, very long journey through the book I released just over a year ago, entitled, here it is once again for the 100th time. Remember your mission. What if, whoa, oh, look, see, the back rooms won't even let us see it. If I put it right in front of my body right here, you can see it. But anyway, we're going to continue our weekly book reading session. And let me tell you, this is going to be a long one, you guys. We got a long way to go. Look at this. We've only come so far in this strange journey. So we're barely skimming the surface. Don't worry, by the time it's over, like what's real and what's not real will have like blended into this seamless, like daily hallucination experience in which you'll be ending up in rooms just like this. The only difference is in the beginning stages, we're usually like running for our lives from a series of weird entities. No, I'm totally joking. But for those that are familiar with the backrooms folklore, there's always some kind of weird entity in the backrooms, right? Do you guys know this? If you don't know this, you'll have to go on your own, internet wormhole search journey. But because right, there's always some kind of weird entity in the back room, right? If you follow the original backrooms videos, then it was some sort of like a being with what was it, like a TV for a head or something. It was kind of comical in a weird way, yet also, I will admit, definitely kind of frightening in its own way, right? Anyway, somebody out there knows what I'm talking about. For everybody that doesn't, I'm sorry. But anyway, let me know if you guys have any questions before we get started. Our audio appears to be working. That's a good sign. And this will be fun. We'll be phasing in and out. If I move too fast, I sort of phase out a little bit. So Willow Root says, I don't even know what a back room is. This is your seed. This is your seeding point on your timeline to enter. Go into YouTube, which you're on right now, later on, or even now, and just type in backrooms found footage. That's your search term. And you'll discover a whole world. I'm totally serious though. Um, anyway, what's this? Somebody's running from, I'm old female running from male skirt chasers. Wow, wow, that's amazing. But you're the CEO, so you should be able to just delegate somebody to kind of handle that for you, right? Isn't that a CEO perk? You can just, don't you have an assistant that can handle that for you? Anyway. Yes, Kane Pixels was I think he's making a Backrooms movie supposedly, right? Supposedly. That's the story. Although, as soon as it goes Hollywood, it usually turns to shit. So my hopes are very, very low for the actual backroom movie. Yeah, yeah, there it is. I saw your comment sliding by. I have limited visibility with my glasses on of the screen. So just so you know, everyone, so I have to like angle my head downward. But yeah, I have a weird feeling that they're gonna Hollywoodify the back rooms and make it suck. I'm just being totally real. I pray that's not the case, but I do have a question for you, Missing Time 420. What's the strain of the day? If there is one, what's the strain of the day? I'm just curious. But anyway, we're not going to waste too much time. We do have one very, very brief announcement coming up this Saturday is our regular monthly Patreon meeting for those of you guys that, because in months past, it's been a little while since we've done a reading live on this channel, but in months and years past, that's been a hallmark of our experience here. And lately, we've been doing most of it on Patreon, or honestly, a lot of it on Rob's show, Typical Skeptic Podcast. But we are going to do another reading live stream in the coming weeks. But for those of you guys that want to be guaranteed to get a brief reading, you can join us for our monthly Patreon meeting. It's coming up this Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern, the same time that we started today's show. And it's been honestly one of the most regular, consistent, and just remarkably awesome things I've ever got to do in this life. I can say that with absolute sincerity, which is weird thinking of myself saying that, but it's kind of like a weird family that shows up there. And anyway, so that's coming up this Saturday. For those of you guys that want to join us, you can go over to Patreon and search for the Blue Flame Collective. I used to put it in the description of these videos, but after a while I realized it didn't really matter what I put in the description because YouTube just downranks our videos regardless. So it's like it doesn't even matter if I tell you where it is. But yeah, head over to Patreon. You can find us at Blue Flame Collective. It's $10 and it's coming up this Saturday, 4 p.m. And yes, Honora will be there as usual. But anyway, I don't see any questions here. Oh, cool. We do have an answer to a question. Black maple 22 is the strain of the day. Okay, I do recall seeing some regular black maple. There was no number attached to it recently. So interesting. It makes its way. It makes its way around. I can't say that I've tried it, but I just remember being like, "Oh, black maple." I think there was another one, black amber, that was rolling around for a bit. But anyway, so let us begin. I think we're just going to kind of go for it here. And so once again, for those of you guys that want to follow along with us, we are going to return to, it looks like, see, I got to take my glasses off for this one. We're returning to page 56, and we're right at the stages where we're getting into some of the weirder kind of like moments. And we're kind of moving out of some of the more like, kind of emotionally charged early days, like self-discovery moments, although we're still kind of knee deep within that stage, which is a foundational stage for all of us that go through what we might call a spiritual awakening or some form of intuitive activation within this life. And so, for me, I think the charting and the description of that process is one of the most important things that we can add to the collective, I guess, stream of consciousness for people that will come after us. I think we have to talk about our experiences and how weird it was and how broken we were and how alien everything in our life was, because I think that really allows people to go through the uniqueness of their own experience. And when I started out on this journey, for some reason, I just entered into a friend group or a social scene in which it seemed like there was a lot of kind of like unwritten weird falsities and rules and assumptions about the way spiritual energy worked or extraterrestrial beings interacted with us as humans that I think, in looking back on it, was fundamentally incorrect from many perspectives. But I think in looking back at a concept that we talked about last week, and that's the consciousness gateway. For me, it was a consciousness gateway that I needed to go through in the sort of the path of just really understanding the self ultimately. And so anyway, before I rant on and on, which you know I will do. Which you know I will do. We're going to continue from page 56. And this, for those of you guys that were with us last week, and for those of you that weren't, we were talking about my early experiences with what is essentially really kind of the only real mentor that I ever had at the beginning of this journey, a person named Britton who really helped me greatly. And so we had just discussed some of the early beginnings of that. I think both of us had kind of benefited from creating a connection really, really early on. And so I'll just pick it up from the bottom of page 56. And I'm going to move this a little closer. There we go. And we'll pause and check for your questions in a moment. So anyway, here we go. I continued to immerse myself in qigong, daily meditation, a strange process of researching energetic anatomy online and then having long conversations about it with the internal voices that had made a permanent home in my mind's eye. It was as if we had deep, expansive, never ending conversations that seemed to take place in my imagination. It involved a host of beings, what I understand as aspects of self, even versions of Britain, who was probably one of the people I was communicating with most at the time, and even myself. I know for some, the concept of inner voices can still only be filtered through the lens of mental illness. And honestly, I mean this sincerely. I am 100% okay with that being a possibility. But at the same time, I don't think anyone can deny that something was actually happening. As crazy as it sounds, a certain type of knowledge was being transmitted into my body as if a key had unlocked a door, and little by little, new data kept walking into the room inside my mind. I'll pause there at the very first paragraph to say, as odd as it sounds, one of the things that I had learned about myself, and I think one of the things that she had really programmed me with in the early stages of this experience, because I think I was blessed to kind of hook up with a person that had had a similar experience. She hadn't been really trained by anyone. She actually stated that her guides, spirits that were with her in this life, had trained her in, being a professional psychic and being an intuitive, or whatever you want to call it. And what's wild is in kind of looking back on the early stages of these experiences, that is exactly what happened to me. There was no teacher, there was no person that said, this is how you know what's real and what isn't. This is the voice of spirit. This is the voice of your mind. Here's how to tell where a blockage is in someone's body. Here's what this is. There was no catalog. There was no website. There was no search engine that I could look up. There was no teacher. There was no class. You know what I mean? There was no Starseed Academy. It was as if something within me began to just open up again and again and again. And it was honestly, for some people that have not gone through that, and I realize that's a lot of people on the earth plane, such things sound impossible. It sounds like, well, that's not the way it works. You don't just suddenly begin to know things in this life. And yet, I'm a living example of it. And I'm not the only one, mind you. So it's not the whole like, I'm the special one. Not at all. There's many, many others that have had such experiences. And so we shall continue. Somehow during that period, this is actually a fun part, very, very true. Somehow during that period, I was even drawn to learning the forbidden art of lockpicking. I bought lockpicks and practice locks online. I stayed up all night learning how locks worked and manically pored over online forums about its history, absorbing everything I could. I was shocked to find out there was a vast community of people online who had the same idea in their own way, and a few people even sent me custom built locks to see if I could crack them. I'll pause there to say I couldn't. There's a few of them I could, most of them I could not. I'm just being real. I was not, it's a skill that I still have to this day. It's a very unique thing. It was something that just showed up. I suddenly became obsessed with it. I would literally carry a master lock in my pocket everywhere, and I would walk around and have this little teeny lock pick and a wrench in my hand, and I was like working with trying to like feel it and move it when it was even in my pocket. For people that aren't familiar with the process of lock picking, that won't make any sense, because it's like you're like, how could you do it in your pocket? But I would just hold it and sort of feel the mechanism of it. And it was a very, very, very strange and unique period of obsession for me. And so anyway, I was shocked to find out there's a vast community of people who had the same idea in their own way, like I just said, and a few people sent me custom built locks to see if I could crack them. In truth, I never had any idea to use it for evil or to commit crimes, but everyone I knew at the time seemed to think so. For real though, like literally everyone was like, "Why are you doing that? Why do you want to know how to do that? Why do you want to know how to unlock something? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna unlock this? Are you gonna rob somebody? You know what I mean? I for some reason every single person at that stage that I told about it was just got really weird, and they were like, "Isn't that like illegal or something?" And I was like, "No, it's not illegal in any way, shape, or form. You can literally go online right now." And you can search for lock picks and you can buy them at incredibly cheap prices and just sit there and like, how do I unlock a lock with a little wrench? You can just do it in the privacy of your own home, which is a very unique skill. But I took a lot of heat for it. I'm gonna be real. I took a lot of heat for for lockpicking, although then I'm already adding too much commentary into this, so I apologize. There's so much more for us to read, but in hindsight, I believe it is important to mention that it was largely because of the symbolism of the unlocking of something within us. And it sounds almost too basic. It sounds almost too obvious. It sounds almost like silly in this sense, like, yeah, yeah, of course you were. Uh, but it's exactly what was happening. And so, anyway, in truth, I never had any idea to use it for evil or to commit crimes, but everyone I knew at the time seemed to think so. I didn't know why, but I was obsessed with the process of unlocking something, not realizing it was something inside of me. And looking back now, I can see that some force in my life was preparing me for yet another massive shift. The marriage was dying. Very true. My job had no relevance anymore. I had even transferred into another area of the program I had worked at since 2011, which we talked about in the early chapters of this. It was a treatment center that I was kind of figuring myself out at the same time while also providing treatment. But I had even transferred into another area of the program I had worked in since 2011, and due to such insane amounts of disorganization, I was basically left to sit at a desk for months with literally no idea of what I was supposed to be doing, and no one seemed to notice. It was as if something was removing me from a timeline. And that needs to be commented on because it was a very sudden shift in my life. It was like all of a sudden my job changed and they were like, "You're gonna go to this side of the building," kind of like in that movie Office Space. And I'm not trying to make a joke out of it, but it's also humorous. If you guys remember the movie Office Space, and that one dude, you remember he was always whining about his stapler. What was his name? Anyway, like my stapler, you know what I mean? Like that guy, it was like they did one of those numbers on me and they moved me over to this other part of this building. And I was kind of tucked away in this random corner in the back end of this other homeless treatment program. And it was like I was given this job title that no one really knew what it was, but since I had experience there, it was like, "Yeah, he'll go and you'll do that thing. You'll assist people in some way." It was like, "Yeah, yeah, I will." And honestly, it was probably 4 months of me just sitting there, just, like, on my phone, like, and you sort of look like you're doing something for a while. Type on your thing, type on your keyboard, do a couple things. I mean, it was like Office Space world, literally that. And they just sort of left me there. It was like nobody noticed. Kind of, I'm trying to remember the guy's name from Office Space. I think was it like Milton? You're thinking Willow Roots. You're thinking of the show The Office. There's a '90s movie called Office Space. I think it was made by Mike Judge. I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant at this moment. But yeah, anyway, so I did. I got kind of like removed from a timeline in some way. I just kind of got placed over on the side. No one knew if I was there. I could leave at any time. You know what I mean? Nobody even had any idea what I was doing. And you know, I say this is me getting back to it. I say this because many of you reading this will have gone through or are about to go through a very similar process in your own way. You might have noticed how every single facet of the previous you has begun to unexplainably shift into something entirely different. Your job, your relationships, and your understanding of what is real in this world will be challenged deeply. This is where a lot of people will try to seek safety or a return to the comfortable stagnancy of their previous selves. I mean, it's understandable. For nearly everyone, this type of change will be completely uncharted territory. And I can say it absolutely was for me. Every day at that stage of my life in 2017 specifically was completely uncharted territory. And that's a weird thing to really know within your heart and soul, where you're like, I have no idea what's gonna happen from day to day at this stage of my life. And what's even worse is I don't seem to have any control over that as well. Not knowing that I did have a lot more control than I believed, but s- and so we will have no previous experience from which to draw on. At times, it will feel like a literal death happening in every area of your life in real time, and yet you will be forced to just sit there and witness it all, or begin to create an entirely new character out of all the rubble. I believe now that had I not met Britain, I would have given up and tried to go back to sleep, in a sense. Not that it's even possible. Many of us who have been through such a process will invariably realize there is no going back ever. Sure, you can arrest your process and block things for a time, but that only leads to further pressurization within the self. And in many cases, all of our old negative tendencies, beliefs, and behaviors will rise up once again and influence us in tragic ways. And, love it or hate it, that's where I will pause once again. Some of you guys know just a little bit more about my story, know that I actually had done that a couple times. I had felt and experienced some sort of great, if you want to call it biochemical or energetic or just wild shift occurring in my body. And I would say the most momentous one sounds so cheesy. It was in get ready. Some of you guys know the story. In December of 2012, and as we got close to the end of 2012, I began to have this feeling like my it sounds so weird. It was like my body was going to explode, like some kind of energy was going to pop out of my head, which sounds so childish and cartoon like and silly. And at the time, I also equated it with some sort of mental illness symptom. And I was like, yeah, I must have some damage from all those years of drug use. Sure, that's what it is. And in retrospect, looking back, it was very much what I would call the organic uprising of Kundalini rising up within the body. That energy kind of showed itself at other stages of my journey accidentally, almost like it was trying to come out at certain times. And um, every time felt like everything within me seemed to die. Every part of me, every negative trait, every sort of ugly thing that I had suppressed within me suddenly showed up. And so, imagine yourself going through such a stage where suddenly, in the midst of your daily life, all of your oldest wounds and deepest darkness suddenly get shoved up in your face. Most everyone, right? You would wanna be like, "Oh, man, I gotta stop this. What the hell?" You know what I mean? I need to get help. I need to get some, you know what I mean? Most of us, rational adult people, would be like, "I need to seek healing in some form or another." And I did. I did, and I went like headfirst back into the world of antidepressants and regular mental health treatment. There's nothing wrong with it, but that was the route that I chose to go back into, and I think in hindsight that was one of the things that really kept me sane for a short period of time, but it also contributed to deep pressurization within the body, which ultimately led to these events that we're talking about now in the book, where it was like something was shooting out of me. It was like this forced transformation. There was no stopping it at this stage. And anyway, the reason why I'm commenting upon that so much is because I think one of the things that I've accepted as an aspect of my mission is to just continue to describe and kind of talk about that process for everyone else that comes after me that will find this later, in the past or the future or, wherever. And so anyway, let's go back to it. Around June of 2017, there was one day in particular in which all I could feel was the loss of everything that my life once was. It was like an unbearable pressure was building inside me. Nothing worked anymore. Nothing fit. Nothing seemed comfortable. It felt as if I was wearing a suit of clothes from decades earlier and the seams were finally starting to burst. Just like for the past 6 months, it seemed the only thing I was capable of doing was practicing Qigong while standing in the backyard in this weird little dingy corner. It's like the reason why I talk about that so much when I say that, for those of you guys that follow the work and you hear me talk about old stuff from my past, is because it was like I was planted there. You know what I mean? It wasn't like this silly thing. It was like for some reason, anybody that knew me would be like, "Where's?" I was Matt at that time. You know, everyone would be like, "Where's Matt?" Oh, he's probably standing in the side of the house back there once again. Right. Yeah. You know, it would even be like, "Where's Dad?" Oh, yeah, I think he's, sitting out back the side of the house over there. It was just like, dude, that's the only thing I could do, and so that's that was very much what was happening, and so it was, the same place where I had seen that lion's face in the sky, and then suddenly one day there we were, and suddenly all at once the dam broke. This is an important part for me to speak about, so I'm gonna read through the entirety of it. The bubble popped, or that suit of clothing I had been wearing for the past 40 years of my life finally busted at the seams, and everything came pouring in, not out, in. I had already become accustomed to strange transmissions in my head. I mean, I had been having daily conversations for over a year with some kind of inner voice that I now knew to be not of my imagination, but part of a psychic activation process that spirit had been guiding me through without ever knowing it. In that moment, it was as if those voices suddenly shifted into right next to me, and I could feel a sensation of multiple presences, beings, or what really felt like invisible people in some way all surrounding me. My body started to shake and tears began pouring from my eyes, which, was nothing new. It was like, it was literally every day. Every emotion inside me had been lit on fire. All of the sadness, anger, and fear rose up to an unbearable degree, as well as the love, hope, determination, and compassion that had been stored in my cells to such an extent it was like I could feel everything at the same time. Words can't even begin to describe the sensation. It was so overwhelming. This is kind of embarrassing. That's another reason why I've told this part of the story so many times, because it's like it's embarrassing and funny and sad and cool because it was true. But words can't even begin to describe the sensation. It was so overwhelming. I nearly ran into the center of my backyard, right into the middle of a pile of old dried out grass, crawling with ants and honestly a bunch of spiders, and collapsed onto my hands and knees. I actually couldn't even walk and completely folded underneath the weight of the most powerful transmission of energy I had experienced yet. And I'll pause there to say that there's no other way I could describe it. It was as if one day, just like I had been talking about earlier in 2012, I felt some kind of energy just popping out of my body, and boom, here we were years later. And as childish and bizarre and silly and ridiculous and crazy as it sounds, here I was, kind of curled up in this weird little position out there in the backyard, and it was like everything was like, like popping, exploding, just it was uncontrollable, and I did literally run into the middle of the backyard, and it was like, how like you'll be raking leaves and like grass, and it's like in this dried up old pile, and it's just kind of like sitting there, for those of us with backyards, and you know what I mean. I just collapse onto this thing, and it on one hand, it was like yet another day of unmanageable energetic symptoms that we can't explain. And at another, on another hand, it was like the pinnacle of everything that I had experienced up until that point, from the perspective of me being completely unable to control it. It was like every voice and every memory and every vision and every sensation and every feeling and every just, which sounds impossible to manage and crazy. And everyone hears such a description in their own way and will create their own version of it in their imagination. And that's perfect. The version of you that you imagine is the most important and most correct one. And for me, it was, I guess, if you want to use a term, it was a crescendo. You know what I mean? It was the pinnacle to something. And so in that moment, I felt a similar presence from a few moments earlier come back to me. It was almost like they just walked over from where I had been previously standing, and I felt them surround me on all sides. From what I can recall, there were four distinct presences or forms that showed themselves to me that day in that moment in the backyard. One of them seemed to be the lion figure that I had seen in the clouds, or at the very least, something that appeared very feline in my mind's eye. He seemed to be at my left and completely towered over the other two forms positioned at my right and in front of me. To my right was what I believed to be a praying mantis or some type of insectoid being. I'll pause there to say that because it's a memory that's still very vivid for me. The images that I saw directly in front of me seemed to change, and it was like a constantly shifting kind of version of some presence. I think the one that I was able to grab onto the most firmly was the image of a praying mantis being, which makes an appearance later on in our story as well. Um, so to my right was what I believed to be a praying mantis or some type of insectoid being. In front of me was something that kept, there we go, something that kept changing forms. One part of it seemed to be an orb of light. Another part of it seemed to be the shape of a human. Another part of it seemed to be like a doorway or a cutout that was in the shape of a human silhouette. Once again, I'll pause. Say it was as if that image was shifting, like just constantly, like almost like little scenes were being shown to me in some form or another. I have a feeling those of you that are watching will sort of imagine your own version of it within the mind's eye, and you'll be like, that can't be what it's like. And honestly, I believe this energy has a way of communicating with each of us. And for those that really kind of lean into the imagery of it internally, you will get your own kind of internal mind's eye slideshow version of it. But anyway, let us keep going. Behind me was something I still don't really know how to describe. It felt incredibly dense, massive, and strong, yet without an actual form or body. When I imagine what it could have been, the only thing I can come up with sounds dumb, but it's the best I can do after all these years, and I realize I just have to own it. I think it was me. I don't know how I know, I just know. It felt like a wall or a waterfall of energy, but also solid and firm at the same time. From what I've learned about what some people call a fifth density life form in the years since, it seems fitting in a few areas, but still falls woefully short in others. Many people regard fifth density as the stage in which our consciousness is no longer contained within a physical vehicle. We essentially have no physical form and begin to exist as pure energy, pure consciousness. We exist in any and all forms simultaneously, depending upon our will and purpose in that unique moment. It opens the door for allowing us to be present on all planes and all forms in all channels of time and space. In my opinion, fifth density is the stage in which we begin the process of reaching back through time and connecting with other versions of ourselves to a greater degree. This is often when great changes and momentous shifts occur in the physical life cycle, but there are also so many ideas and opinions about how that works, depending on who you talk to, that I leave room for the distinct possibility that I'm completely wrong. I'll pause there to say that I do believe that was what we would call a fifth, or you could say sixth, or you know what I mean. I think the attachment to numbers in the description of densities or states of consciousness is ultimately this arbitrary assignment that we give these states as humans that really don't describe anything, within that state of consciousness other than what our limited humanness can, perceive. And so, it could be 6, could be 7, could be, I don't know, 22D. It really, really, really doesn't matter. What I understand it to be, and I think that's probably the most important part of it, because what you might understand that process for yourself to be will be something different. But what I understand it to be for myself was that higher dimensional version of self that showed itself, that chose to be present within that moment so that I could experience a certain form of transformation within my life. And so, you could, like I said, you can put any you can put any number on it you want. But anyway, whatever or whoever it was, this energy and 3 others surrounded me in my backyard under the blazing sun out there in San Diego in 2017, and a stream of visions, images, and scenes began to play in my mind with a speed and ferocity that I cannot describe. I saw years go by, moments in life that had never occurred, fragments of memories, even other worlds that I seemed to also be in that very same position, at that very same moment. In a flash, I somehow began to realize that they were showing me timelines or pieces of other realities. In one, I was very sick and obese. In one, I was in what looked like an ICU with all kinds of tubes, as I turn the page here, coming out of my body. And in another, I was standing next to a casket at what seemed to be something like a funeral. There were hundreds, maybe thousands more, but I'm unable to grab onto them now. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that it even matters. It was like every timeline was somehow shown or available. And I think on one hand, I think the ones that stuck with me were kind of like possible probabilities that were kind of close, like alternate, kind of like story endings sort of things. Um, Feels kind of like that. But I think the reality is, with a lot of these things, we never truly know. I guess we're all figuring it out together. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. There were hundreds, maybe thousands more, but I'm unable to grab onto them now. They were also beautifully positive scenes as well. While they seemed innumerable, one in particular stood out, and I think my consciousness just grabbed onto it because it felt like something the Earth version of me in that moment would have wanted. In that scene, I seemed to be standing in front of a large group of people talking about something. I had a big screen behind me, and I seemed to be giving some kind of a lecture. All around the outsides of the room were swirling lights and orbs cascading and flying around the room. People seemed to be singing, and while it all sounds very cheesy and movie-like right now, it felt absolutely beautiful in a way I had never imagined. As I sat there, folded over on my hands and knees, I felt a vibration of sound and thought inside of me that shook every cell in my body. It said literally these words, and it's so funny because I've told this story so many times now, and I think, how it is when you tell a thing that happened in your life, and over time it sort of loses to you at least, the emotional impact, kind of like a band who, they'll play their hit song so many times they're just like, oh god, that one again. So, like over time, there's a piece of the impact of that experience that can only be known to the beholder, and other people will experience it very, very differently. But the literal words that came through my body on that day in that moment were, Matthew, you have a mission. It is time to remember. My body continued to tremble and tears poured down my face. I knew it was already happening, but I still didn't know where it was taking me. I accepted it and I pleaded with that energy. I tried to bargain with it. I tried to ask it to show me more and assure some kind of safety or proof that it was real. Nothing more came, and in that very second, my wife appeared on the backyard steps with this look of pity, annoyance, and mild disgust on her face. She had her hands on her hips and said in the most dry way possible, "So, what do you want for dinner?" I looked at her. I looked back at the shapes around me and then back at her again, still wondering if she could see or feel what I did, yet I knew that she did not. In fact, it seems like she hated whatever it was I was becoming, and in that very second, I knew I was leaving. It was almost like I already had months prior to that, or even back in 2015 when it all started. Whatever it was that occurred out there as I kneeled down sealed something inside of me. I feel like I signed a contract at that moment to take the next step into something I had been slowly and maddeningly inching toward my whole life without knowing it. The next 3 or 4 weeks went by in such a blur that I didn't even have time to react to it all. I spent the next few days still sitting out there in the yard, just listening and feeling those four energies that seemed to have stayed around for a while, yet not as palpably as that first day. I remember agreeing very clearly on a soul level that I was leaving, and I thought I could bargain with it. I even went to such an extent as to place, this is literally true, you guys. This is kind of sad. I went to such an extent as to place four chairs around me at this outdoor table in our front yard, in our front yard, which was visible to everyone in my neighborhood. I imagine now I probably seemed completely insane. I made a firm announcement out loud one afternoon, sitting there in full view of anyone who could have been walking by or outside, that I would do whatever they wanted, go wherever they wanted me to go, and follow the path for the rest of my life on earth under one condition. And it wasn't even for me. I asked that my son Bailey would be protected from hardship and that he would not be subjected to the addictions, mental illness, and extreme trauma that I had endured throughout my life. It was like a proclamation of sorts. I will do whatever you ask for the rest of my life as long as you keep him safe. And I got to pause there because, like at that time, that was like the most deepest and most vulnerable emotional pleading I think that I had ever gone through in this life. It was like some part of me was so like committed to, like, I'm about to do something. I'm about to leave this place. I'm about to go in this direction. I'm about to do, you know what I mean? I've said this so many times, it's cheesy. I'm about to, blink, but I don't know how to blank, you know what I mean? And so it was like I knew something was going to happen, but I didn't know how or under what terms. And I thought I could sit there and say, I'll do whatever it is as long as you know what I mean? And it was like one of those moments that only those who are parents can understand, where I was like, I'll do whatever it is as long as you make sure nothing happens to that kid. I will do it. And I was out there crying, just like, I'll do it. Okay. And I can honestly say the beautiful thing about it all is that he actually has, and he's doing remarkably well, has not been subjected to the same issues or difficulties or maladies that I have had in this life in the 8 years since that moment. So I have to be honest, like something honored the agreement. Sounds crazy, right? Sounds crazy, but literally true. And so that was me out there, you know what they say, like that whole thing where like you think you're gonna make a deal with God, I was that guy, like, I'm gonna make a deal with you, you know what I mean? And that's what I thought I was doing. I mean, I can honestly say he just turned 24 recently. He's doing amazingly well. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. And getting back to the text here, in a way, I'm grateful that no one was out there to witness such an embarrassing scene. But the truth is, ever since that day, the agreement we made was honored. Like I just said, he was kept safe. And somehow so was I. I still don't know who or what it was beside me in those moments, and maybe it doesn't even matter. By the second week of July, everything had come into place. The preceding weeks were a blur of activity as I left my job of 6 years, cashed out a meager 401k. That's just silly. It was such a low amount of money. And broke the news to my wife that I was leaving. I was about to take a leap of faith that many in my life equated with a complete psychotic break. So you just decided you're going to leave everything behind and become a psychic now? She asked me in the last days, honestly, several people asked me that. I can honestly say, and there was people in my life that were close to me at that time that actually, called me on the phone to be like, "Are you okay? I just want to make sure you're okay, because a couple months ago you were doing really good, and now you're just gonna go be a psychic now. That's that type of talk. We're like, you okay, little buddy? You know what I mean? That type of shit. And you're like, dude, I'm better than I've ever been. You know what I mean? And so there was a lot of there, there was a lot of like what's the word, kickback. There was a lot of assumptions. It was like I drank the Kool-Aid in some way, and that was literally what one person said to me. And I remember, she was trying to reason with me, going, like, just be sure not to go too far. Don't take it too far. Don't lose yourself, and I remember sitting there going, like, you don't understand. That's literally what we're doing. Of course. You know what I mean? And it wasn't that forceful at the time. It wasn't that obvious either. It was still something that I was just kind of writing out, excuse me, within my own way. And so, yes, it was true. I was about to do something so crazy and ridiculous to those around me. I believe they all knew wholeheartedly that I would fail and come crawling back to start all over again very soon. I think even my wife at that time thought that in her own way as well, as despite being visibly sickened by what I had become. And I'll be real, I could see it. I think a lot of us have been in relationships in our life, and you've had those moments where you look at the person you're with and you realize they're looking at you from this perspective of complete disgust, as if they don't know you, as if you've become this frightened, horrid thing, and they're just like, and it was a very strange period for me, because it was like I felt sort of possessed or owned by that relationship at that time of my life, because the fact is, we had a house that was owned, and long-standing job, and I had all the normal, like, adult things, you know what I mean, that people equate with being established and stable in this world. And it was like I was making a choice to literally end it, to quite literally end it. And so, I think there was a lot of people that had become kind of sickened by that previous version of myself. The only thing that actually worried me was the idea of losing contact with my son Bailey. I mean, it wasn't like I was going into another world or moving to another country, or was I? He ended up being my one and only fear about the entire process, but some part of me knew I had to push on, and in truth, when I finally broke the news to him, he seemed to be oddly accepting of it, almost like he knew something I didn't know already. And so on July 17th of 2017, I placed the remainder of my belongings on the curb. I left my job, my marriage, the house we owned, every single piece of my previous self, and simply drove away. The first 39 years of my life had ended with a literal departure from my old life, and one of the greatest leaps of faith anyone could go through. I drove away from San Diego, California toward Los Angeles in tears, very much in fear, and wild waves of unbelievable hope for what was to come, while in truth, I had absolutely no idea. That day as I drove away, I remember some random song came on as I sped down the freeway. I can tell you what freeway it was, 5 North, uh, coming out of San Diego County, riding up the 5 North. As I drove down the freeway, I remember some random song came on as I sped down the freeway. I don't know who it was or what the song was called, but a sample played right at the start of the song. It felt like a message from those spirits that had been sitting with me in the backyard during all that madness and wild manic activation over the last 2 years. It went something like, the important thing to remember is this: you must be willing to sacrifice what you are right now for what you could become. And so, That was it. That was the initial departure. That was kind of like the early days kind of jumping off point of like, okay, I'm gonna go. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna leave behind my old life, literally, completely. I mean, like when I say literally, like it's the perfect description of that word that we misuse so commonly. Literally, everything was left behind. And so, I mean, there was a few things I took over to my mom's house at the time, couple boxes here and there, that I tried to keep. And but everything, it was like only what was in my car. And what made it even funnier, as soon as I got to LA, I realized there was so much shit in my car that I threw out even more things. And I was just like, it was like I was just tossing away stuff, every single thing. And anyway, that's it. We made it through the first major chapter. Congratulations, everybody. And thank you for withstanding that wild journey. There's a lot more to go. I'm going to pause for your questions. Let me know if you have any questions on any part of this that I have talked about. I'm going to scroll upward and find anything that feels important here. Crystal clear, what's going on? She says, does anyone know where to find on YouTube where it says how long the live video has been going? I can tell you right now, on my screen, it's been going for the light is so bright. Like, when your light is so bright, you can see like every part of yourself. It's wonderful and also frightening. We're at 50 minutes and 47 seconds. So I don't know. I don't know how to tell how long it's been, but I, at least from the viewer's perspective, you know, what's up, Felicia? How's it going? She says, I hear the name Maddie sometimes when I'm thinking about you. Well, Felicia, that is a testament to your intuitiveness, because that's what my mom and my sisters called me. And I hated it then, and I hate it now. No, seriously, I always hated being called that. But you are very, very correct. That's what everybody called me. Which is sort of like worst case scenario for anyone with the name Matthew. It's like, oh God, don't become Maddie. Whatever you do, don't know. So anyway, thank you for your comment. She says, sometimes I wish to be asleep again because of the loss I experienced and everyone whom I loved. I still mourn that life I thought I was going to have, but my soul said no, awaken, right? I'll be real. There's parts of those stages. There's aspects of my previous world where I'm like, wow, I kind of wish I still had it like I had it then. You know what I mean? I think it's normal for us to have that experience. But I have to be completely honest. So at the same time, I am grateful on the deepest soul levels that I am not that version of myself now. I mean, for those of you guys that watched, maybe parts of the earlier, readings that we did over the past few weeks, it was like I made such a distinct effort to completely allow that version of myself to pass. It was like I really had to completely exorcise some whatever it was piece of me from that stage. And not everyone needs to do such a thing. Not everyone needs to. I just needed to, you know what I mean? But anyway, what's up? Holland Sass, being emotional was a defect in their eyes. I know, right? I know. That's just the makeup of our world, right? They called me so sensitive. I hate it. That's okay. Me too. We were literally that kid. We were literally that kid. Sign of an empath. You defaulted to tears in every situation. Even if it wasn't sadness, you'd just be like, just like boom, there it is. Anyway, thank you, Crystal Clear. Appreciate you for hanging out. Yeah, a lot of us walked away from a whole bunch of things, right? Pre-awakening journey. Felicia walked away from a successful teaching degree. I had so many different identities prior to this, like a lot of us, you know what I mean? We do so many strange versions of ourselves in this life. But yeah, Willow Root says, I left a job of 10 years, sold all my possessions, boom, retirement money fund, left the country. Hell yeah, way to go. Very, very similar process. You liberated yourself from a timeline, which, for me at that time, that's literally what I was doing. I had to completely remove myself from that environment. I had to remove myself from the version of me that I was in that relationship. I had to remove myself. I mean, physically, my physical body was going through such a change at that time as well. I mean, we could go on and on and on about it, but um anyway, I'm going to scan through for any other questions. Let me know if you guys have questions on this. We're going to be reading a little bit more before we go today, but we finally made it through that epic chapter. That's how you can tell when a book is unedited. You'll notice like people like me will do a chapter that's like 60 pages long. You know what I mean? People will know, like, oh, that's a sign you didn't really have an editor. No. For those of you guys that have the physical copies of this book, you will notice how many typos there are too. The good news is most of them are the type of mistakes that as you're reading it, you don't notice it because it goes with the kind of like a verbal flow, so you don't realize there's words missing because your mind fills it in. But if you look at it like objectively, you're like, whoa, huh, you skipped a few words there, didn't you? And it's like, sorry. Yeah, but it's true. It is true. Jose Rivera, what's up? Here's a question. How's my relationship with my kid? He's doing really, really good. My son is an EMT. He lives out there in the wilds of San Diego, California. Um, yeah, he's actually doing remarkably well. I so much so that I often hesitate to talk about it publicly because it's just I've never been one of those people that like puts my whole life out on blast in public like that. But I can honestly say, in going through the transition and the changes that I went through in 2017, while it was frightening, while there was a lot of weirdness, there was a lot of periods, where I was missing and like absent, I think, from his teenage years. I think that as he's moved into his 20s, I've just noticed like the relationship has changed and grown stronger in just a very, very different way that shows me that that was how it was supposed to be. And what's interesting to note, since we're getting so personal into all of this stuff, that was one of the sort of discussions that I had with Britain, like in the early days, where she had been talking me through this process of like, hey, I think you're going to make this change and you're going to start doing this. And I honestly remember telling her like, yeah, I'm just worried about like, influences for my kid. What will happen if I'm suddenly not present in his life like I have been? And it's funny because she was the one person, the one psychic I ever met in this world where everything she ever told me came true, which is weird, right? To think about. You're like, what? Come on, man. Dude, literally every single thing. Every single thing. And she was like, actually, you guys are going to have a different type of relationship in his 20s, and this whole thing will change, and there's nothing to worry about. And I was like, okay, crying about it. And sure enough, lo and behold, here we are in a totally different stage years later. And it's like, whoa, huh, interesting. Somebody called it, but yeah, I guess I could say I'm certainly grateful for that. Anyway, we're gonna read a little bit more. Thanks, Robin Lane. I appreciate you for hanging out with us. So we're gonna do just a little bit more of this strange saga. I think we're almost out of the back room. Should we? Do you guys think we should we leave the back rooms now? What do you think? Type 1 in the chat if we should stay in the back rooms. Type 2 in the chat if you want to leave the back rooms and head to a different location. I'm not kidding. 1, stay in the back rooms. 2, enter a different pocket dimension. We can do it right here, right now. I'm just curious. So let me know. Let me know. And oh, we got some people. Yeah, people want to shift. Okay, we're gonna leave it behind. I know it does. It casts sort of an unhealthy glow, and an air of confinement and aimless, frightened wandering over our live stream. So, let's change to a different dimension. We have very limited choices, you guys. We could switch over to my apartment on an alternate timeline. Do you guys want to switch over to my alternate timeline apartment? Yes or no? Actually, I think we should. We'll switch over to the alternate timeline apartment. Boom, look at that place. That's my Steinway over there. No, just kidding. It's actually a Suzuki. No, but anyway, yeah, so this is our new house out here in Austin, Texas. We just moved into this sprawling 14,000 square foot compound in the hills of Austin. And so anyway, yeah, this is it right here. Here it is. So we're gonna go we're gonna we're gonna go ahead and keep reading. And that would be crazy, right? That would be crazy. What if I did have a fireplace? That would be awesome. I would honestly love to have a fireplace. Okay, let us continue. See, we're now in a totally different environment. You know, the vibe has shifted, right? Right? We just exited the back rooms. It's easy to do, by the way. Anyway, so we're gonna go back to our reading. We are on page 66, and this is our next chapter entitled The Blue Flame. Oh, I have to hold it in front of my chest. This is our next chapter entitled The Blue Flame. And so let us return to this. By the way, feel free to have a seat on the couch over there. If the couch gets full, sorry, it's that way. You can just sit on the piano bench. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Blue Flame. Prior to my entire world being blown open in 2015, I had lived nearly 40. Actually, let me do a little bit of a preface before we begin these chapters. This is an important thing for those that are still watching this. These are essentially anecdotes, chapters of experience. There's not one fluid timeline. So as we move into this next chapter, what I'm now describing is another event and an experience that I had along the journey of awakening. It's not necessarily within the chronological order of the process we have just described. This is something that occurred early on. And what I did within this book was chose to contain or bring in just a bunch of experiences that sort of tied together an overall process of transformation rather than one fluid start to finish, beginning to an ending timeline. So, having said that, let us return. Prior to my entire world being blown open in 2015, I had lived nearly 40 years trapped in a strange series of revolving doors, wounds, addictions, mental health issues, and much more. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all trauma and disharmony, though. I had had a very productive 7-year run as a semi professional musician, playing in a band, traveling the country on tour, like literally all over the country, making albums, all of the wildness, literally all of the wildness that comes with it. Well, some of it at least. In truth, I never really fit in that world as well, nor did I in any other path of identity I had walked down until my quote unquote great awakening of 2015. And even then, the journey to find myself within all that madness was completely uncharted territory. Like I said in the beginning, I was always too much in some way, too intense, too weird, too negative, too big, too small, too fat, too depressed. That strange excess of intensity within me had ruled my life for so long, I didn't know anything other than the constant struggle of always having to limit myself or immediately temper my responses to what I thought the world was giving me. My entire life had become a series of masks or false versions of myself that seemed natural at the time, but I had no idea I was hiding behind all the wounds and unhealed energy I had experienced in my life up until that point in 2015 when my entire world was ripped open. During that period, so many unbelievable things were happening. It was like on a daily basis. For months straight, I had no control over the intensity of energy that had been released in my body. Some reading this will have already heard the term or may already be familiar with the concept of Kundalini activation. We've been talking about it within this book the whole time. For those who don't know, Kundalini is a term used to describe chi, ki, or life force energy that exists within the body. Many people that watch this channel will be familiar with this term and already have some knowledge of Kundalini and vital life force essence and many of those things. The position that we take within the book is from much more of a beginner's perspective for those that would be discovering this information for the very first time. And so, having said that, uh, it is a non physical current of primal essence that animates our blood and fills our bodies with life. At times in this human journey, this energy can be released, unlocked, or even blown open on a massive level. Some people seek their entire lives to reach this point, and for others, it happens by sheer accident, even through trauma in some cases. It was shown to me very early on that when I had that freak crown chakra opening in 2015, this energy source in my body had been ripped open. One simple way to think of it is like what happens when you pop the cork off a bottle of champagne, or even when you shake up a bottle of soda, and as you open it, the liquid comes shooting out due to the extreme pressure being released. The majority of us are living in a state in which this energy is very tightly contained within the body. This can be held in place by belief systems, programming, trauma, pharmaceutical medications, illnesses, energetic blockages, implantation. The list goes on, like literally goes on and on. Many people have observed that it's almost like this was by design here on Earth, because it seems like the majority of third density, 3D conventional religious teachings regard this as something negative, unattainable, or just plain demonic, which I can assure you is utterly and completely false. As the Kundalini rises in our bodies, we begin to awaken our natural psychic abilities, ancient pieces of ourselves, and can even activate your God given ability to travel outside of the body into different dimensional planes of existence. In fact, some believe this is often when true extraterrestrial or higher dimensional energy is finally reachable in a tangible sense. That is not to say, however, that these things are only attainable in a state of Kundalini activation. Some people will experience them naturally. And if there's one thing I've learned over the past few years, is that there is always an exception. The second you say it's always like this, or it only happens like that, spirit will show up and prove you wrong in some way, shape, or form. It is inevitable. If there's one thing I've learned along the path of doing this work, we could say from a quote unquote professional perspective, is that there is really always an exception when it comes to the world of spirit, when it comes to energy work, when it comes to intuitive work. You will find it time and time again. It's like there are very, very few absolutes, and it's like we're living on so many timelines that connect and clash and coincide and run parallel with each other, that our versions of what's possible within reality changes greatly day by day, back and forth. And granted, we're in a stage right now where we have much more control over it than ever before. Yet the balance of power on earth has us convinced otherwise in most cases. But anyway, before I get off track, which I will do, there will always be an exception. And so if you were looking for an origin point, or one of the primary places where this energy lies in dormancy in the body, you can look to the perineum, or at the base of the spine near the coccyx. That's also your tailbone, for those who don't know. When Kundalini is activated, amazing and even potentially dangerous things can take place in the body and our consciousness. Some people will awaken to shocking levels of psychic ability, and yet others will lapse into what seems like schizophrenic states, or anywhere in between the two. The practice of Kundalini yoga, Tantra, or other forms of spiritual or healing breath work are extremely helpful for awakening and putting this energy into motion in the body. While it won't be appropriate for everyone, I do believe it is something that is rightful for us to experiment with in this life. Prior to my awakening experience, though, this very concept was completely unknown to me. I mean, I had heard of it, but I really had no idea what the source of energy was, or if it was even real. I will forever be grateful to those strange elders at the oneness groups, because they were the first ones on earth who explained this concept to me in a way I can understand. For those that are wondering what I'm talking about, in the earlier chapters of this book, I mentioned how, I had been sort of subjected to a explosive crown chakra opening that was just given to me at a outdoor homeless fair by a group of people that were part of just this kind of spiritual kind of like vanilla like meditation group, which became sort of a cult later on. But you can look back on our previous 3 episodes to learn more about this. But they were the first people that were able to really explain that process to me in a way that I could grasp. It truly helped me realize that I wasn't going crazy, and one of my missions was to learn to balance, maintain, and then appropriately express this energy through the newly emerging facets of my transforming identity. On one particular morning in late summer of 2015, probably within 2 months or less of this massive explosion of energy in my crown chakra, I experienced something truly mind blowing. Before we get into this, I will say this was something that I really had a hard time figuring out how and where I was going to fit this into this book. And I think that this experience and a couple others that we'll talk about later on are really one of the main reasons why I chose to make it sort of an anecdotal kind of series of experiences rather than one fluid timeline. Because there were certain events and things that, number one, defied all logic in ways that really the only way to really talk about it is to just rip the band aid off and say it. And also because I think it was something that was so out of this world for me that it kind of just needed its own tale. It was a story that needed to be told in its own way. And so, anyway, let's get back to it. On one particular morning in late summer of 2015, probably within 2 months or less of this massive explosion of energy in my crown chakra, I experienced something truly mind blowing. If you've read anything up to this point, you will likely be aware that I say that a lot. And it's kind of funny looking back because pretty much every single day, something mind blowing, truly amazing, or just plain impossible seemed to be taking place around me. While there were so many unbelievable occurrences around that time, there are a few that really stick out as being the most pivotal in my entire life, and that's why they have made it into this book. On that day, I recall getting up in the morning and preparing for work, just like anyone. We're just getting dressed, you're putting your pants on, whatever, like everybody out there. Most nights around that time period, I hadn't really slept and would drift in and out of strange worlds, portals in the ceiling, like we talked about, all kinds of wild things that make no sense at all. That day in particular, I remember waking up and being able to see, feel, and even hear the channels in my body. And yes, I am completely aware of how impossible that sounds to some. It looked like these glowing pathways and circuits of energy that ran through every inch of my body. I now know this system to be the meridian body, for those who would like to look this up. And for a few minutes, I could simply touch places on my body and be completely aware of every channel and pathway contained therein. Which I'll pause right there to say, I mean, it's hard to really even conceptualize that now, even for myself having experienced it. But it really was like, I remember I kind of noticed it when I put my hand on my other hand, just feeling and noticing these like weird lines that were going through my body. And I kind of would put my hand there and I could feel, based on where I touched, that there were these lines and these sort of passageways that would go in these specific directions. And I could like literally touch it and go and see the whole pathway that was on it. And it was like so dense and varied that I could tell that they were connected to these other structures and these other places. And there were these sort of like almost things that looked like circuit boards that had kind of tied and sort of, pieced all of these structures and pathways together in the body. I remember standing there and kind of just like putting my hand even on my arm, and I could feel like just something go boom all the way up toward my lung. And I was like, what? And it was like you could see the pathway. And I think for some people, just instill the hearing of that sounds impossible. It sounds like a crazy movie. It sounds like some kind of hallucinogenic mental illness episode, and it might have been all of those things. But what's wild is, and we'll talk about this in a moment, I'm already getting way too far ahead, but I learned later on that they were actually real things, like literally real. But anyway, I now know this system to be the meridian body for those who would like to look this up. And for a few minutes, I could simply touch places on my body and be completely aware of every channel and pathway contained therein, all the way down to the organs, memories, fragments of emotions that were flowing through me. I will say even more than that, all the way down to some of them had a taste, some of them had a smell, and some of them had a sound. Some of them had a color. like it's like, whoa, like where how do you piece that together into usable data that you then, form into some sort of an energetic, modality that opens up those pathways in other people? Don't ask me how, because, I have literally no idea yet. That's what eventually happened. So anyway, let me go back to it before I go on a dumb tangent here. I just laid there on the couch and tried to dissociate myself from what I was feeling. I didn't know what to make of it all, and as pathetic as it sounds, every time something like this would happen, as you guys know, I tended to have this intense wave of fear and tears would come over me. It sounds very uncool and emasculated to say that, but it's the literal truth. I did not handle this period well. It wasn't mystical, sexy, or cool in any way. In fact, I was a pathetic, cowardly, miserable version of this process. I feel like this needs to be said because I know I am not the only one who has had such an experience, and it needs to be known that at the start of these types of intense changes were not the stuff of Hollywood movies. They seemed to rip me into pieces and force me to become something completely different. It took me just about 2 years, literally 2 straight years, to actually begin to get a handle on this stuff. And by that time, so many things had been changed in my life on so many levels that there was absolutely no going back. And we were just talking about that in the previous chapter. There were many times when I was like, I wished I could go back and just be like, wish I could just go play Call of Duty and forget about all this and just, and it was like, nope, sorry, bro, too late now. And anyway, after I was able to effectively ignore or push away what I was feeling in that crazy moment, I was able to finally get up and get ready for work. I remember getting in the shower and marveling at how I could see rainbow light in between the drops of water coming down upon me. It was amazing, but I knew no one would believe it, and so I just shut up and swallowed it all down the best I could. I kept so many beautiful and even frightening moments locked up inside of me for so long after that. It's only after meeting Britton and eventually my second wife, Honora, that I ever felt truly ready to discuss the amount of unbelievable things I was experiencing. As I stood there in the shower, I began to feel something new. And looking back, it was related to what I had experienced a few minutes earlier laying there on the couch. It was like all the circuits in my body came alive and lit up. I stood there for a few minutes just feeling it all and seemed to dissociate from my body while staring up at the sunlight coming into this little bathroom window. I could see the tops of trees outside, and it had become normal for me to look up and to the left as if I was searching for something or waiting. After a short time, I remember noticing something like the smell before it rains. I've heard some call it ozone, but I don't really know the proper term. That's the closest way I could describe it. In the next few seconds, my whole body seemed to jerk and shudder. I wasn't trembling in a mild way. It was like big, sudden, spastic movements that I could not contain. I mean, like really bad ones, you guys. Like, I was like, like literally like glitching out, like trying to stop myself from shaking, like while I'm standing in the shower first thing in the morning, like going through some weird episode. Like it was not cool. It would, imagine seeing that and you're like, whoa, what the hell's going on with you, bro? Like for real though. It was like, it was very, very, very embarrassing. And so I felt heat and wind and some kind of force shooting all the way up my spine as my arms automatically rose up just at the sides of my head. My fingers seemed to twist up, and I involuntarily started glitching out, similar to what I've observed as stimming in people with autism. I'll show you guys exactly what I was doing. It sounds so dumb, and I'm being really vulnerable here, but it was like this energy came in, and I was like standing in the shower, like doing this weird glitch out thing. And I remember my hands came up like this, and I was like doing this like literal, like stimming episode in the shower. And it's important to mention it was like my hands were like kind of curled up in this weird, like thing like this, right? Which sounds like, why are you even telling us this? I'll explain why in a moment. Yeah, and so as I stood there, uncontrollably opening and closing the palms of my hands with my fingers pointed upward, and just kept shuddering and stimming out, when suddenly it happened. Before I mention this part, I have to admit that out of all the things I had experienced yet, this was probably the most oddly vulnerable and unbelievable of everything so far. Seriously. This was at the time the greatest pinnacle of anything that I had experienced, the most impossible thing that had happened to me up until this point in my journey. I still have a hard time talking about it because I don't see how anyone in their right mind would think that such a thing could happen, but it did. And I'm going to be honest, like I do have a hard time talking about it. I had a hard time writing about it. I couldn't figure out where to put it in this book because I was like, how do I explain this? How do I tell this story without people laughing and snickering and going, wow, that sounds so ridiculous and stupid? You know what I mean? But here's what happened. In that moment, as I was stimming out in the shower, completely covered in water, I felt and saw a wisp of electric blue fire emit from the palm of my left hand. Yes, fire, an actual blue flame. There was even a faint pop in the palm of my hand, like something had broken loose. I looked at that blue flame erupting from the palm of my hand, and as I opened and closed my palm one more time, another blue wisp of electric flame started to emerge, still in my left palm, only much, much stronger. This was when a most unusual reaction took place in my body. It was sad. This was when a most unusual reaction took place in my body. I suddenly felt an overwhelming primal fear come over me, and I was deeply ashamed of what was happening. In my mind, it was as if I had done something wrong, which is absolutely crazy to think of, but it is exactly what I felt. In that very second, as that feeling of fear and shame ran through me, the fire disappeared and has never returned since. For real. It's crazy to think that I was standing there in the shower, literally water pouring, the window's like right up here to my right, and I'm like going like this, like glitching out. And I feel right here, it was like this, like this pop and this wisp. And it was like I could feel it forming and moving in this sort of like electric type of heat and something, when you're like, this should not be possible. And the instantaneous feeling that came over me was like, "Oh God, what have I done? What did I do? How? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." It was like overwhelming, like, "I'm sorry," like one of those feelings, which is very strange, right? Some may call it a paradoxical reaction, right? Anyway, I will keep going. No, I didn't turn it into a superpower and, show up on YouTube and try to, wow everybody. It was like I went into a state of shame and collapse, actually. Uh, Actually, that's how it went. And so let us continue. After that moment, I felt so exposed and freaked out that I quickly ended the shower and, in a strange, frantic mess, tried to exit the bathroom without even really drying myself off. And looking back, it seemed like something or someone was watching me, and I felt exposed or seen in a way that caused me to reject everything that was happening. I mean, an actual blue electric flame of energy had appeared in my palm. That's the kind of thing one only sees in superhero movies or comic books, but why was I so afraid of it? What caused that feeling of shame? When I left that bathroom, I really felt like someone saw me and was coming. It was like I had to escape from something that I didn't understand and hide it away in a place inside me where it could never be found again, even by me. In the years since that original spark of flame appeared, I have tried countless times to bring it out once again. Very, very true. While nothing has ever ignited in the way it did in that original moment, I began to study the meridian body, and I learned that the spot in the palm of my hand where I felt that subtle pop as the blue flame arose is actually an energy portal connected to the pericardium meridian, known as a Lao Gong point. When the Lao Gong points open, it is said that a flow of Kundalini, or Chi as I usually refer to it, can erupt from the body with such force that one can move objects without touching them or even ignite an actual fire from their body. If you don't believe me, go into a YouTube search wormhole in your own time. Look up this literal search term right here: Qigong master making fire, or making fire in the palm of his hands. Enter those search terms on YouTube. And you might navigate through a few fake ones, but you will inevitably find the guy who really does it. And he really does do it. And he's not the only one. And I wish I could say I could just, do that now. It was cool at the time, but it wasn't cool. I wish I could say it was. You know what I mean? I wish I could be like, man, this amazing thing happened. It was unbelievable. It was like, no, it happened to me. And I felt like I was going to die. I was so utterly ashamed and frightened of it. One of those things where it's like, you're like, if only I could go back and do it again. And yet, what's crazy is I think in looking back now, even if I could, that's the way it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be shown something, I believe. And so, anyway, search that guy on YouTube, and you will find a direct demonstration of this phenomenon. I learned later that while one really can learn to emit such a powerful flow of energy from the body, it is something that will nearly always need to be cultivated within a person over many years of dutiful practice. And while it is very possible to have a sudden explosion of this energy in cases of extreme activation, it is also something that is often extraordinarily difficult to maintain for nearly all of us. I had been subjected to such a forceful rising and release of Kundalini in the body that this source of energy had been blown open for me, but I was not yet ready to receive it and was unequipped to handle the intensity of emotions or old wounds that had arisen with such a powerful flow of energy. In the time since this event took place, I have learned a lot about how energy flows within the body. In my observation and experience, this type of paradoxical fear-based reaction is more common than one might think. Depending on how quickly or forcefully our energy is activated, it can lead us into very beautiful or very dark places. This is especially true for those dealing with a large amount of emotional trauma or wounding that has not yet been healed. As the energy rises in your body, so do the things you have suppressed. In some cases, this can be all the more confusing when we are dealing with past life trauma as well, because we might not have any idea where these feelings originate from. While in some cases this can be seen as a benefit for those who are on a dedicated healing journey and can understand this phenomenon, it can also be disastrous for others because you can nearly lose your mind in the intensity of unmanageable emotions, thought forms, and a host of other things that can cause extreme wreckage in one's life. And I think it's important to mention because you guys have seen it. Some of us out there have encountered it. I think there was a stage where, later on in the story, it's not mentioned in the book, but in the first job that I had working in a physical store, I actually had encountered people that had come in to get clearings and, treatment that had this like complete dissociation from reality and were experiencing very, very damaging mental health symptoms as a result of some form of just massive, massive explosion of energy in the body. And it really, for those that aren't ready for it, which was me at the time, it can cause so many problems. For those that want to look more into what I'm talking about, you can enter this search term chi sickness, which opens the door to a bunch of different possibilities. However, that was just, it's a very common search term that you'll find, and people will talk about how as that energy rises, or just, explodes in the body, like it can bring out a lot of really negative behaviors. Anyway, you guys already know about a lot of this. I'm going to pause for questions here as we get close to the hour and a half mark. Missing time says spontaneous combustion. That is also possible. For real. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. Felicia says the popping sound was the spark lighter, like when I use my RV stove, the lighter of the flame. That's very possible. It's very, very possible. It would be cool to be able to do stuff like that now, but yet at the same time, like when I feel into it, it didn't feel like it was a thing that was meant to be carried forward. It didn't feel like I was supposed to be, doing some bizarre kind of superhero like energy thing. You know what I mean? It just it doesn't, like, when I feel into that outcome or that timeline where that stayed with me, it was not appropriate. That was not what needed to happen. When I look back on it, like I've already said, it was something that I needed to be shown what was possible. I needed to be educated through an experiential way, what types of things and reactions, possibilities, and just things were capable, for us, or for me, maybe at the time. Maybe that's just one of many ways to look at it. Who knows? But anyway, what's up, Cat L? Question: if someone had told you beforehand about what would happen with the Kundalini event and the blue flame, would that have made it easier for you to handle? Ooh, that's a cool question. I don't think I would have believed it, to be honest with you. I don't know that I could have received it, to be totally real. I think prior to that stage of my life, it's not that I would have said, "No way, that's not gonna happen." I think I was one of those people that was more apt to just be like, "Oh, really? Yeah, okay. Mm, right." You know what I mean? I it's like I which is kind of a pattern that follows me to this very day. I would just be probably very non-reactive to it. You know what I mean? And just be like, "Oh, really? We'll see." Like, yeah, right. But so who knows? Who knows how I would have reacted to it? That's a good question that warrants further examination. Anyway, what's up, Ramy Salem? Matt, when the blue flame appeared in your hands, were your hands glowing? No, I don't think so. I can tell you that it felt like there was a layer that was over my hands, like some kind of liquid that was like hot and cold at the same time and electric. But the only visual manifestation that I can recall was this. It's like as I would close, it was this hand. As I close my hand, it only happened twice, so it's not like I have some great wealth of experience and all that's happened all these times with which to draw on. I'm just describing a thing that happened twice. But as I would close my hand, it was like I would close it like this. And that was how I felt it. It was like, and then this fear came in, and it was like, no, and then it all vanished. But no, I wish I could say they were glowing. That would certainly be cool. That would be a good scene for a movie, right? Maybe. Whoa, damn, Willow Roots, what happened? I got stuck in my bathtub where all my muscles started contracting, like muscle cramps all over my body. I literally thought, this is the end. This is how I die. I'm naked, and who knows how. Well, yeah, you know what, man? I feel you on that one. How long will it take for someone to find me? That's a frightening thought, right? I hear you. Anyway, let me know if there's any other questions. We're close to an hour and a half. We can This time I'm gonna wait for your response. We can go a little bit further if you would like, or we can save that for next time. The good news is this chapter is not 20, it's not 60 pages long. In fact, we might just close it out. I think we're gonna close it out. We're gonna close it out, and we'll be out of here in less than 2 hours. Not that time limit matters, but I'm gonna be real, you guys. I think 2026 is the year where, well, actually, it's already starting now. So 2025 and 2026 are the year where, here we go, ready? damn it, we're gonna get our YouTube game all together, right? We're gonna be what is it? We're gonna somehow get we're gonna pump the algorithm. So which is honestly why I've been doing shorts, but anyway. What's up, Joyful Jennifer? Do you play the piano? Not really. I can play by ear a number of instruments, but I'm very out of touch with the musical realm now. So not really like I used to be able to. But this is actually just a StreamYard background. You can tell. See how I'm like phasing in and out. Here, we shall bring it into reality. Are you ready? Okay, guys, we're moving back to base reality. Sorry. 3, 2, 1. Oh, what? We got out. We're back. We're in the real world. What? Oh, shit. Okay. Anyway, thank you for joining us in those pocket dimensions. Let's get back to today's text. Thank you, everyone. I'll check for your questions again in a moment. In the time since this event in the time sorry, here we go. And I guess we're going to reread this paragraph. In the time since this event took place, I have learned a lot about how energy flows within the body. In my observation and experience, this type of paradoxical fear-based reaction is more common than one might think. Depending on how quickly or forcefully our energy is activated, it can lead us into very beautiful or very dark places. This is especially true for those dealing with a large amount of emotional trauma or wounding that has not yet been healed. As the energy rises in your body, so do the things that you've suppressed. I guess this needed to be read again. In some cases, this can be all the more confusing when we are dealing with past life trauma as well, because we might not have any idea where these feelings originate from. While in some cases, this can be seen as a benefit for those who are on a dedicated healing journey and can understand this phenomenon, it can also be disastrous for others because you can nearly lose your mind in the intensity of unimaginable, unmanageable emotions, thought forms, and a host of other things that can cause extreme wreckage in one's life. When I would reflect upon the overwhelming fear and shame that had arisen in me, I was unable to tie it to any previous experiences in my life. After doing a lot of meditation and inner work on this over the past few years, and honestly, in working with people in a QHHT session that I had, which we talk about later on, and working in my own processes of, we could call it exploration of previous selves. After doing a lot of that work, I've come to believe that this was in part due to exactly what I mentioned above, past life trauma, or at least in my case. I was able to find in my internal journeys of meditation and self-examination scenes that would play in my mind of previous lives in which I had been greatly persecuted for unlocking such abilities. I was even put to death in one life for helping others to unlock these things within themselves as well. It was during a time in which our society had been utterly dominated and controlled by some form of old world religion, and such activity was strictly forbidden. Now, I'll talk just to preface this brief experience that I'm going to mention here. This was brought to me in working with another person as well in the years prior to the creation of this book. Another very very talented psychic who did an amazing job at introducing me to what I would call the process of soul shard retrieval, which holds many kind of connotations, ideas, and different meanings. But it was through my work with this person at that time that I was able to identify later on, after this moment that I'm speaking of here, the event that I will now describe. And so it was during a time in which our world had been utterly dominated by some form of old world religion, and such activity was strictly forbidden, even punishable by death. Here we go. It seemed a bit familiar in ways to the Salem witch trials. From what I have been shown, it was somewhere in Europe during a period that looked kind of like the Spanish Inquisition, where I had been part of a spiritual order dedicated to awakening these primal forces in the body for the purpose of spiritual advancement and growth in this life. As you can imagine, to the control systems of old world religion, this is often considered pure heresy. As a result, myself and several others were we're not allowed to say this word on YouTube anymore. I hear it dramatically down ranks your video. So I'll say, as a result, myself and several others were ritually unalived by the members of this church in truly gruesome ways. In my case in particular, I was shown that during that lifetime, the first wave of punishment for me had to do with, get ready, this is gruesome, cutting off of my thumbs and what appeared to be several fingers. I could no longer pick anything up or feed myself, and the wounds had become deeply infected, leaving me with little to no use of my hands or arms. After that, I was left in what appeared to be a cave or underground dungeon for an unknown period of time, prior to being ritually burned at the stake, along with a group of others who had endured the same fate. Some of them were children as well. I'm not trying to say that this was the sole cause of the fear and shame that arose in me when this particular activation took place, but I do believe it is in one part a large cause of why I had such an intense reaction. And so I'll pause there to say, in my opinion and experience, what I believe is was that part of the reaction that I had upon experiencing that explosion of fire in the palm of the hand was due to being, literally sacrificed in other lifetimes and sentenced to death for engaging in very, very similar practices. And so which to me feels like a thing that a lot of us in, maybe we could say intuitive roles, or for those of us that kind of work in this way, whether professionally or not, a lot of us have had lives like that, where this is work we've done before, whether we know it or not. And, just like we've heard throughout history and many other times, people were greatly persecuted for engaging in such behaviors. And so I'm not trying to say this was the sole cause of the fear and shame that arose in me when this activation took place, but I do believe it is in one part a large cause of why I had such an intense reaction. In the time since that experience, I have learned a lot about the areas of our energetic anatomy responsible for emitting such powerful energies. I learned that it often stems in part from certain meridians and chakras, often referred to as fire centers. One of the largest fire centers in the chakra body is the sacral chakra, which originates in the sacrum bone itself, but also extends into our reproductive organs and holds the fire of our passion, intensity, creativity, sexuality, and much more. Each chakra has emotions and energies that will help strengthen it, and also energies that can greatly restrict the flow throughout that region as well. As it turns out, one of the most fatal and limiting emotions capable of causing complete shutdown of the sacral chakra was the very thing I experienced in that moment of seeing and feeling that flame arise in my palm, which is shame. For those that don't know, and a lot of you guys know that watch this, but for those that don't, shame is an emotion that is greatly, greatly dampening to certain energy centers in the body. And the more that we'll carry of that within us from previous experiences, the more it will have a just disastrous effect on your ability to use your intuitive faculties. It's like shame and guilt seems to have such an impact. It's wild. And so for me, I think that was what arose within me. And I've learned in the years since that that shuts down the sacral chakra, which is a big fire center. And so I also learned that the kidneys themselves are one of the primary holding grounds for fear in the body, the bladder as well, to be exact. The kidneys are some of the most powerful direct drivers of chi in the body, and when we have highly pressurized amounts of old energy lodged within us, they can bring up all kinds of intense fear, anxiety, and worry. The reality is, I wasn't ready for what happened that day. Well, to be exact, I was ready to understand that it was possible. Otherwise, I believe I would not have had that experience, but I was not ready to embrace and cultivate that energy without doing some major work on myself, work that seemed almost counterintuitive to awakening fire in one's palms. It was all about the emotional body for me, and honestly, it still is in many ways to this very day. It seems each of us will have a bit more wounding in certain areas, and most of us will have to do with thought forms still trapped in the mental body, as well as outdated ideas and beliefs that persist in our lives. For some, it will have to do with deep physical or chemical imbalances in the physical body. And for others, it will be all those trapped emotions that we never dealt with. That was mainly me. Well, I was a combination of a lot of things. In most cases, it'll be a very curious mix of all three, and probably a lot more than that. But it is important to mention one thing: all of the most amazing abilities, epiphanies, and psychic breakthroughs in your life will be just on the other side of the wounds you still have not yet healed within you. I really do believe that with my heart of hearts. I think for those of us that end up, whether it chooses you or you choose it, going down a path of what we might call intuitive development or awakening in this life, all of your abilities, all of those understandings, the clarity that comes from knowledge of self and how to connect with spirit, all of those abilities are just on the other side of the emotional wounds that we still carry from the previous stages of our life, from childhood, from school, from I don't know, adulthood, whatever, other lives in this case, which is a hard one to grasp. It's a hard one to wrap your head around. There's a lot of people who still, pay no attention to such things. There's a lot of people for whom most of what we're talking about here today is still the stuff of, sci-fi movies and, just mental illness. And yet, I think one of the things that brings people to this now moment watching this video right now is that I think most of us here agree and have experienced in some way, or at least have been granted with the knowledge that these things are real. And so just remember that if you hear anything today, all the abilities that you're trying to develop are just on the other side of the wounds you have not yet healed. And so, anyway, I'm living proof of this phenomenon as the more work I have done to acknowledge and heal these deep imbalances within me, the more I have awakened to being able to experience and repeat a number of very high level psychic skills. And I'll pause there because I genuinely don't like doing that flex. I don't like saying that, like, oh, yeah, I use these skills or I do this. You guys will notice that some people really have a very easy time talking about all this, like, and I do this and I open them up to 22D and I, remove every implant and I am, operating with Archangel Michael. And people love making those claims. And for some reason, it's never been a thing that I took joy in. I didn't have a good time saying, I can do that and I can do 50 readings in a row, no problem. And most of them will be right. It's like you could use that as a flex, but at the same time, it's like, I think in doing that kind of work over and over and over and over again, while you do gain the ability to kind of interface with people's energy and kind of connect with spirit, ultimately it just goes back to your own self and like your own emotions and like your own thought forms and your own understandings of what's real. And I think most people that do this work professionally will agree with me, like ultimately you are your own greatest barrier. And so I think sometimes we will learn to defeat those and work past them. Like I think I have, from the perspective that now it's the only work that I do in this life, but you know what I mean? There's always another thing. There's always another area, you know what I mean? And so I think some of you guys get exactly what I'm talking about. Others will be like, what, whatever, you know, but anyway. And so we're almost done. But along with what I believe to be a practice of dutiful shadow work. Well, here, let me go back one sentence so we have context that makes sense. After doing all the work that I've done to acknowledge and heal these deep imbalances within me, the more I have awakened to being able to experience and repeat a number of very high level psychic skills and teach them as well. Along with what I believe a practice, along with that, excuse me, I'm stumbling over my own words. Well, I guess we've been reading for almost 2 hours. So, along with that, I believe a practice of dutiful shadow work is one of the greatest keys toward paving the way for new abilities to come online. It's kind of like that old saying, the thing you want the most is in the place you least want to look. And I know that I'm not the only one who has made such an observation. What is shadow work though? This is important. We're gonna end our reading portion with this here today. What is shadow work though? If you hang around the right spiritual community long enough, you will hear a lot of people reference that term. But when looking at the patterns of growth in their lives, you will very quickly learn that they not only don't know what it is, but have rarely ever engaged in such a process. And I mean that sincerely. You guys will see this all day. Hang out on Facebook for a while in these spiritual groups, and everyone's like, don't forget to do the inner work and your shadow work. And, these are just terms for a lot of people that they throw around to cast, fake, waves of self importance upon each other and to look like experts in some unknowable area that no one can really understand. And very, very few people actually dive into that process. Shadow work is the practice of learning to look at and heal the many layers of darkness within each of us. It is done by fearlessly peering into that which we try to avoid, the hate, shame, anger, resentment, and deep wounds that exist under the surface of our being. We learn to sit with the ugliest pieces of who we are, our greatest sins, our most egregious errors, the truly mangled up mess of emotions and dysfunction that we try to hide from the world. Shadow work is more than just acknowledging those things, though. It is also about bringing them up to the surface and just sitting with them, examining them, accepting them, and learning to love those fractured pieces of ourselves. As we do so, we begin to look ourselves in the eyes, drop the layers of judgment and avoidance about the ugliest things we hold on to, and come to new understandings about why and how we ended up in that place to begin with. For some of us out there, deep shadow work is sometimes one of the only ways we will ever move past that which keeps us stuck in previous versions of ourselves. And if you're one of the people watching this channel, you've probably gone through processes very similar to what I'm talking about here, where we really learn to look at, like, why am I like this? You know what I mean? Why do I hate that person? Why do I have this ugliest thing about me? And let's unpack it and completely disassemble it, and let's understand every piece of it. When did it start? Oh, is that me when I was age 6? You know what I mean? All of those things, and also a lot more. And so in doing so, we create learn new perspectives, learn new ways of coping with old wounds, and begin the process of airing out all the festering, infected emotions that live under the surface in every living person. Those that devote themselves to this practice will inevitably come to turning points in their lives in matters of addiction, deep dysfunction, suicidal ideation, abuses, sexual misery, and much more. I firmly believe that deep shadow work is one of the direct avenues out of the suffering that we experience from those types of events in our lives. And it's not saying it's easy. You guys will know in your own way, those that have gone through such processes. One thing we often see with a lot of the love and light ascension communities is that there's an over reliance on false positivity and a complete disregard for the dark underbelly that exists everywhere in our world, especially within ourselves. My honest recommendation is to actively avoid any social movement or spiritual group that does not acknowledge sincere shadow work as being essential to the quote unquote awakening journey. Without actively transmuting, releasing, healing, and embracing these pieces of ourselves, we become stuck in stages of spiritual growth. And in many cases, we'll never move past those we surround ourselves with because everyone just pretends that there's only love and light, and everything outside of that doesn't matter. In my opinion, this is a grave mistake, and you will see it everywhere once you learn how it works. I know in my case, learning to embrace the deepest wounds and darkness I held on to for years was a literal turning point in my life. In truth, it still goes on to this very day, and for nearly all of us, it will become a lifetime practice of learning to face the darkness within us. And looking back on what I experienced with that blue flame, I believe that in part it was shown to me to give me an example of what was possible if I was able to clear the layers of dysfunction that led me to react in fear and bury it deep inside. You might be reading this or watching or hearing it. You might be reading this though and say to yourself, okay, I'm willing to do all that, but how? Well, there are numerous ways, but I can only tell you what's worked for me. The first thing I recommend is what many call, and this is a real thing that I still do to this day. I don't know if this is real top level shadow work. This is what has worked for me. So take it or leave it. For real though, the first thing I recommend is what many call mirror work. Well, there are many versions of this practice. What I learned to do very early on was sit or stand in front of a mirror and just stare at myself, look at myself in the eyes, look at my body, the lines on my face, to fearlessly notice the imperfections and to allow what arises as I let my mind focus on it all without judgment or avoidance. That in itself can be a very tall order for someone and will give you many things to work with in only a few minutes a day of just facing yourself and allowing what arises. And I really mean that. If you want to experience true vulnerability in your life, take some time to really truly look in your eyes long enough to feel your thoughts and wishes and dreams and wounds and emotions rise up inside you and notice what comes up. It's going to be a direct avenue to all of the things that are lying just underneath the surface of what's going on inside you. And I mean it very sincerely. People book with me every day from all over the world. And one of the many situations that a lot of us come up against is I don't know how I feel. I don't know what's going on with me. I've lost touch with it, or I'm blocked, or there's something standing in the way of it. And I think if you're one of those people who sometimes has lost touch with the self in that way, that's a very vulnerable, very direct method to really connect with the self. And it doesn't mean it's going to lead you to some beautiful catharsis or some moment of wonderful healing. You might just be faced with the ugliness of who and what you are. Seriously, you might. I have been. We all have a bit of it, right? We all got a little bit of it. Sometimes you will look that in the face, and that, to me, that is shadow work. And so that's my recommendation in the beginning. Look at yourself, look at your eyes. That in itself can be a very tall order for some of us, and will give you many things to work with in only a few minutes a day of just facing yourself and allowing what arises. Most importantly, I would allow my mind to begin to bring up all of the hidden and compressed thoughts within me. For those who have not yet done so, be ready. When you open the door to those pieces of yourself, it can be a lonely, sickening, and vulnerable process at the start. You will often be flooded with many ugly things you never wanted to remember or feel again. And sometimes these old fragments of data can stay with you in the days and weeks after dredging all that up. Those of you that have gone through it know it's like, yep, you open that can of worms and sometimes they all crawl out. In truth, this is one of the ways you'll know you're doing it right. I would just stand there and peer into it all, give myself thanks for surviving, and actively forgive myself for the areas in which I've faltered, reacted poorly, lashed out, or behaved in ways I knew I shouldn't. Even more so, you will need to learn to appreciate and love these broken pieces of yourself. For those willing to make this type of self work a priority in your life, you'll be surprised at how quickly and effectively you can learn to move on from all kinds of things that can plague people for years: deep rage, wounds of unacknowledgement, social exclusion, childhood abuses, sexual trauma. The list goes on and on. And I just say that because those are all the things that I was dealing with. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying all those areas are fixed. It's not like we're all healed and perfect, but it was like when I began that process, I started noticing the greatest amount of change in those areas of my life and how I reacted and perceived and understood those things. And so in the end, it doesn't matter how you do it. One thing we know for sure is that nothing will ever be solved through continuing to bury the darkness within us. In fact, I will say it again: all of the most amazing abilities, powers, and talents you may have buried inside you right now when it comes to psychic work or energetic ability will be just on the other side of all of those things you have buried inside you that you try to hide from the world. Devote yourself to uncovering and giving love to those very things, and you will watch miracles happen in your life in ways that right now might seem impossible. And I truly, truly mean that. I think at the end of that experience and looking back at this bizarre morning in which I was losing my mind to this crazy wave of Kundalini energy in the body, and this wild flash of blue flame appeared in my hand. When I look back at like the soul level lesson that it brought into my life, it was that miracles, power, amazing things, beauty, like all sorts of abilities and magic was available. And for me, it was on the other side of dealing with the emotional wounds that were buried within me. For the other people, that sounds like boringly obvious. You're like, well, of course. Oh, God, But for me at that time, that was the first time I had ever discovered such a thing. And um, honestly, that's the reason why I chose to place that piece early on in the book, was because it was like I needed the other versions of myself that would find this book throughout time and space to know that such things were possible, even if it felt like a fairy tale. You know what I mean? Even if it felt like a movie. So anyway, so we'll pause it there, and it looks like we're right at 2 hours, so that's a good sign. Anyway, let's check for your questions before we roll out of here. Thanks for your comments, everybody. Felicia says, coolest thing about shadow work is that my soul knew how to do it. I didn't know, but I just followed my instincts or intuition. Exactly. I feel you, man. Totally. Totally. Thanks, you guys. Joyful Jennifer. We rise from a different perspective. Totally. Oh, you tried it too. I see your comments now. The things Matthew talks about in his book, I tried mirror work. I did this and more to heal myself. I faced my darkness, and it wasn't pretty, right? I know, right? You will inevitably find the ugliest, most broken versions of yourself deep in there. That's a hard one, right? It's like, yep, that was me. Uh-huh. That was me. And not to say even from like some evil perspective, sometimes it was the broken version of us. Sometimes it was the toxic version. Sometimes, whatever. It was a version of you that you needed to be to survive at that stage of your life. So anyway, what's up, Holland Sass? I see a lot of that. I just kill them with kindness and shower them with love. No, sometimes you have to check people. Actually, I am a big, sorry to say it. Sorry to say it, love and light, guys. I am a proponent of that. And I also having had to experience it. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you know, it goes both directions, but it'll teach you a lesson you'll never forget, right? Just saying, it'll teach you a lesson. Thanks, Joyful Jennifer. Thanks for hanging out with us. I'm just scanning through the chat, so let me know if there's any big questions on anything that we've talked about today. I want to thank you guys for getting through the first, I think that was our first official 2 chapters. Don't worry, there's only 300 pages left to go. But we will be back next week for the next exciting episode. I'll give you a little bit what happens next in our next chapter, or rather, in next week's exciting episode. We will be hearing the story of, well, I'll just tell you right now, my first conscious, what I believe to be my first conscious extraterrestrial experience. Conscious. Which many people have heard that story before. But if you haven't heard it before, we'll be discussing it in the official kind of recorded version in the coming week. In the meantime, let me scroll down to the bottom of the chat. What's up, Ramy? Explain why Kundalini down the whole spine causes burning pain or pleasure. Yeah, it does, right? Well, I think that there's a number of reasons for that, and I might not have all the pieces of it. What I can tell you that I've understood from experiencing that and also watching that process in other people is it's very much like flooding or over pressurizing a system. It's like pushing too much of something in it. It's like an overdrive pedal for those that play guitar out there. You know what I mean? It creates this distortion, and it forces an amplification of a certain signal within the body to an extent that it can cause anything from like an orgasmic feeling of electricity and fire and ice and all kinds of sensations in the body, to also a deeply, deeply frightening, absolutely mortifying experience that can cause some people to feel like they might even die. I'm just being real. It goes both directions for people. There was times early on when I was doing energy work. There was actually a conference that I did a long time ago called Star Knowledge Conference. some of you guys are familiar with star knowledge people. This was before Chief Golden Light Eagle passed, and I did one of the star knowledge conferences, and I was just doing sessions there, and I remember this kid showed up, and I say kid because he was a kid. He was like 18, 19 years old or something like that. And I'll just be real. We accidentally opened up literally opened up just this catastrophic flow of energy in his body, to the extent where, very much like me, he was like shaking and like, "Ugh," and he couldn't control it. And it was like, oh, whoa, oh shit, oh man. One of those moments where you're like, wow, that was certainly not the planned outcome. It's like suboptimal. It was like he was really going through it. It had been opened too forcefully in his body and he couldn't control it, and he was like shaking and trembling out of control. And I I noticed that is a thing that can be sort of ignited in some people. And what I've noticed is that when it's ignited in people and they're just not set up for it, it's just not ready for it. That's not the intention. You know what I mean? That's the infrastructure has not been, contained, so to speak. Those are people that tend to have a much more difficult experience with it. And it's not to say that anyone can really be ready for it. I think that the process of, Kundalini activation within the body fundamentally changes the sort of makeup or the flow of energy within the brain. That's my understanding, at least. It opens up pathways that for some people, they should not be opened, right? I mean, we could go on and on about it, but I think those are some of the reasons why it causes that, because it's overloading the system. I'm sure there's a million other reasons. I probably just said that 4 times in a row somehow. What's up, Selena? She says, "Do you guys ever get sick of doing shadow work?" Hell yeah. I think it comes in seasons. You know what I mean? I don't know that it's necessarily a thing that we have to be like every day. I'm engaging with my shadow and like working on all of these negative things about myself. I'm not saying that it needs to be like this like 24-hour a day focus, but I think it's a process that we'll go through, for those that choose to remain spiritually aware and kind of, we could say cognizant of the flow of energy within the body and what's happening. Yeah, it's probably a thing we'll end up doing forever. But anyway, we're just past 2 hours, so we're gonna roll out of here in a moment. Let me know. Not sick of it. Physically sick. Yes. Yeah, for real. Yes, also physically sick. You can work yourself up into physical sickness and you'll get like a flu, or the body will start getting body pain, or you'll get a sore throat, or like, for real. Those are psychosomatic reactions to non-physical energy that take place in the body when emotions or thought forms rise to such a point that it creates this physiological response. It's very, very real, as my nose is now running all over the place. But we made it 2 hours before that happened. So anyway, I hear you. I feel you. Happened to me recently, right? It will. I hate to say it, it could even happen again. I'm not saying that in a forecasting way. I'm just saying like, you know what I mean? It's like, it could happen again. Maybe it's supposed to, maybe not. You know what though? I think it does get easier. I think it gets easier. But anyway, we're speaking in vague generalities about all of these things, and so we're gonna roll out of here. I want to say thank you to everyone that's hung out with us over the past 2 hours. Hopefully, this video will get recommended to some new people out there. So before we go, let's all pay homage and respect to the YouTube AI algorithm, and let's pause for a moment to acknowledge our sponsors. Oh, wait. Yeah, we don't have any sponsors. Okay. Then we'll pause to honor we'll pause to honor the YouTube AI algorithm. Dear YouTube AI algorithm, please allow this video to get more than, what is it, like 600 views? Maybe it will. That would be amazing. Anyway, I promise. I promise. We'll sacrifice a '90s era dot matrix printer later on. You know, like one of those old ones that's really loud. We'll sacrifice one by the light of the moon, and then you never know. You'll come back here next week, and we'll have like 50,000 subscribers or something. You know. Next thing you know, anyway, I'll shut up there. But anyway, thank you for hanging out with us. Please do hit the like button on your way out. And if you'd like, join us again, same time next week. We're going to be doing this for a while, you know, unless something crazy happens. We'll be back here next week. So once again, you can get your copy of this book if you would choose. It is in the description of this video. You can get it on Amazon right now. If you want to support me on this journey, that's a reasonable way to do it. It's a nominal investment. And you can also join us this Saturday over at Patreon in the Blue Flame Collective. In the meantime, thank you for hanging out. I love you guys, and I guess we'll see you